All right, welcome everyone. It is time for a review on Matt Dillahunty's one of his latest videos. A couple things real quickly. Godless Girl, you're gonna hate this video because I'm kind of going to agree with Matt right off the bat. So all the people that are going to come over to hate on me for ever, always dishing on Matt, this video I'm kind of going to agree with him a little bit, but I think you're gonna get why. I think you're going to understand why. It's not going to be a long video, and I always say that, and I never hold to it, but I am going to this time for almost a certainty because I do know that Matt Dillahunty at 2 o'clock today Pacific time. As a stream why he left the ACA. I'm not going to get into any of that right now. I'm still getting information on that. I don't know the full story, but if you do know more about it, message me. But I'm kind of getting bits and pieces that for the reasoning why he left the ACA. But that's a different stream. What I want to talk about is this particular stream, because this particular stream I find fascinating that he did this video right before he left the ACA. I mean, I don't know if it is coincidental. I don't, but I find it to be very, very interesting because how many times have people told me, Steve, atheism is just a lack of belief, and Matt only holds to that. Matt doesn't go out and say God does not exist. I'm like, really? Well, I have found multiple instances where over the last how many years he was with the ACA, he has said, God does not exist. That he has the positive claim there is no gods. That's always been his position since I've known the man. And I've known Matt for a long while. I've talked to him about this off air, obviously. Sorry, guys. Most of our conversation, like when he came on and had that debate with the Inspiring Philosophy, him and I had a nice little discussion prior to that, but it wasn't recorded, unfortunately. But anyways, I know that Matt believes there's no God. I mean, and so when I had people on Facebook telling me, oh, well, Matt's never said that. Oh, that's what he believed 10 years ago. Who knows what he has now? I'm like, wait a minute. You're arguing to me that Matt Dillahunty used to believe there's no God, and now he's moved to the more agnostic position? No, I'm sorry. I don't buy that. That's just nonsense. So this video, vindicates me wholeheartedly because this is Matt's true position, and I applaud him for that. Finally, once he is decided to leave the ACA, that's when he starts, putting out his true position. I find it to be of note, let's put it that way. But anyways, before we get too far into this, it looks like everything's fine, but I want to make sure you can hear me. Hi, Vendala. Hi, Surgeon General. And of course, Godless Girl. She comes around anytime I even mention Matt. I say the word Matt, and it doesn't even matter if it's Matt Dillahunty or not. She just perks up and says, oh, I'm going to go for Steve's channel and see what's up. But I am curious what she thinks. I am. So let me know how I do. But anyways, this is a video for his Patreon product. Patreon, whatever. What do they call him? His Patreon. He has a name for it, but it doesn't really matter. Patreon project, I think it is. But I'm just going to go through this real quick. I'm going to do it at 1.5 speed, so he gets through it faster. Plus, Matt speaks much slower than I do, so it should be just fine. But let me know what you think. Because again, remember, he has advocated for the longest time that atheism is merely a lack of belief, and that people have been telling me Matt doesn't hold the positive belief. The hell he doesn't. I think most atheists do. I think that, of course, my position is atheism is the positive belief, but of course, others, have a different usage of it, which is perfectly fine for them. But I do think that the vast majority of people that are non-believers that are in the atheist communities are, in fact, atheists who either will say there's no God or will believe it, but then not really put it out there to try to hide their true positions. And I find that to be dishonest. I really do. But let's get into this. Okay, so you can't hear that real quick, and I just had it working, so let me change my properties here because you guys can't hear him. I can hear him, by the way. I'm wearing my earbuds for a change. I'm trying these new earbuds out, and they seem to be working okay. They're paired, so but I can tell you guys can't hear it, so maybe I'll just try my headphones, see if that works. See if that works on speakers. 1 sec.
I'll hopefully it'll still hear.
Yeah. You guys can hear that. All right. Let me know how their
Space Patreon project presents. God is just pretend. Hey everybody, welcome. I'm still wearing the eye patch for a little while. Hopefully it'll still heal on its own. But for those of you who pay attention to what clothing I wear in these videos, some of you are like, hang on a minute, Matt's wearing a t-shirt. I don't think he's ever worn a t-shirt in any of these videos before. He always wears a collar shirt and looks, at least semi-professional. You're probably right. And why are you paying that much attention to what I wear? But today I wore this shirt for a very good reason. This is one of my all-time favorite t-shirts.
I don't,
and
by the way.
For the longest time,
I don't really care what he wears. I don't know why he wears an air patch. I'm assuming this, he has something medical and hope he gets better on that. I haven't followed his I haven't followed him for a while, so I don't know if he had glaucoma. I don't know if he had cataract. I don't know if he had something happen to his eye. But I can tell you right now, eye injuries are painful. So I hope he heals really quickly, because I can tell you from experience, I had corneal abrasions at one time, and excruciating doesn't really describe how painful that experience is. It's one of the two most excruciatingly painful experiences I've ever had in my life. The other is when I burned my finger. That was bad. But corneal abrasion. Oh, and when I had my hernia, when I ate habaneros. That's 3 times I've had excruciating pain that I can think of. But the corneal abrasion is not fun. But anyways, I don't know what he has that, but I don't pay attention to what he's wearing. But apparently people did. I think that's going to set the stage for this particular review in this particular video.
Barely wore it out in public. And I wanted to talk about why, and why I've kind of changed my mind. The shirt, I mean, you can see the God part already, but the shirt just says God is just pretend. And I bought it, I don't know, right shortly after I first started publicly identifying as an atheist.
Okay, now that's important that he said that. Now, he said he bought it right after he first started identifying as an atheist. He identifies as an atheist, and he buys a shirt saying God's pretend. That is something that is along the line of a positive claim. Well, it is a positive claim, but it's the position that there is no God. That now you could argue that God with capital G is referring to the Christian and Judo, Christianic God, and that might be fine. That's fine. I don't really care at this point whether you want to talk about local or global atheism. It really makes no difference to me. My framework has always been within the global atheist position. So if you read any of my papers or anything like that, I'm usually going to be talking about global atheism rather than local atheism. But he is making the statement that as far as even the Christian God does not exist. Right now, could you apply it to all gods? Yeah, in my framework, yes. But Matt would have to say if he's talking about all gods. But he's definitely talking about the Christian God. I think that can be definitely implied. So if we're talking about local atheism to the Christian God, then yeah, he's making the plausible claim there is, God is just pretend, right? Matter of fact, it was who was it? The what's his name? One of the Christians out there that was doing apologetics. Basically, had this little thing whether either you say God's pretend or you're not making a positive claim or something like that. Something along the lines of you can't have it both ways. That you can't just sit there and say God is pretend and then say you're not making a positive claim there's no God, because you are. If you say that God's a fantasy, if you say that God's a myth, you are saying, in fact, God is not real. I mean, they're equivalent. I mean, there's a implicature there, right? I mean, if I say you don't exist, I'm saying you don't exist. You're not real, right? You're imaginary or something. Pretend in this case.
So I've had this shirt for 20 some odd years now, and it's comfortable, but once I started talking about the subject and I got an understanding of the burden of proof and how claims require evidence, and if you make a claim, you have to back it up, it struck me that I was walking around making a claim that God is merely pretend. And
again, something I've said for a very long time, that if you are going to claim that there is no God, yeah, there's a burden of proof, but there's different types of burden of proof. And we've gone over this, and Matt never learned the nuances between them. Matt has never bothered to go look into the nuances between the many different types of burden of proof. There's not just one burden of proof. There's burden of persuasion, burden of production, epistemic burdens, evidential burdens, discursory burdens, many different types of burdens. And so if I say there's no God, I may not have occurred a burden of proof to you. I have one to myself to justify why I have that belief, but I may not owe you a damn thing, And I had this happen just the other day on Facebook where I said Bigfoot doesn't exist, and like, can you prove it? I was like, well, no. Now you're strawmanning me because I never said I could prove there's no Bigfoot, but I definitely am convinced there's no Bigfoot. I'm telling you my epistemic position. I'm giving you an autobiographical assessment. And he's just like, well, what's your evidence for that? I'm like, I don't really care. I'm not trying to convince you. And he didn't understand. At that point, I have no burden of proof to him. If I'm not trying to convince somebody of anything, I don't have a burden of proof to you, right? Even if I have a positive claim, I can say, look, gods don't exist. And you can say, okay, what's your burden of proof on that? I'm like, I'm just not interested in having a conversation with you, but I'm just telling you that my belief is there is no God. And again, from an atheist point of view, not necessarily obviously my point of view. But if I'm not trying to convince you, I have no burden of proof. I have no onus to give you a damn thing, right? Because I could just be giving you what's called a self-referential assessment of my belief box. I'm just telling you what my beliefs are. I'm telling you what they are, not having to defend them, right? If you say, hey, Steve, do you have the belief that 1 + 1 = 2? Yes, I have that belief that 1 + 1 = 2. Could you defend that? Yes. Will you? No, I'm not going to waste my time with it, right? So Matt really doesn't really fully understand that the burden of proof is a very complicated thing, and it's more than just one, and there's more going on in a conversation. Hey,
How do you back
Dustmeister
that up?
88. It's
Now,
been
we
a
talked
while.
before about burden of proof, and I'll touch on it briefly here, but one of the aspects is that if you're going to make a case for something,
Yeah, Braxton Hunter. Thank you, Chris Taylor. It was Braxton Hunter that came up. And Braxton Hunter's, his, what was it called? His dilemma, Hunter's dilemma, isn't really extremely novel, but I mean, it makes a point. It's something similar to what I've said as well. So, I mean, I'm not saying he took it from me. Don't get that. But I mean, I've said something similar. We've all said something similar. He just made it more formalized. But then again, people can argue my paper is derivative of OPI. Okay, fine, but at least I formalized it.
it should be reasoned and evidence-based. And it's very, very difficult to demonstrate the truth of something that's kind of a universal negative.
And that's
I can
true.
say,
I give him that.
there's no evidence that there's a God in the palm of my hand. But to make a universal declaration that God is just pretend is a little different. And it's a little different from just saying, hey, universally speaking, we don't have evidence that is sufficient to warrant concluding that a God exists. And so I remain unconvinced. And this was both a matter of intellectual honesty. I don't want to run around claiming, your God is just pretend, if in fact it's not. That would be just as much a mistake as the people who run around saying, God's going to get you when he's probably not. There's no reason to think that that's the case.
Well, and okay, so and in some degree, yes. Obviously, if you run around and you're saying there is no God and there is a God, yeah, you'd be wrong. So what? You fix it, right? Big deal. You get it wrong. I don't know why people are so concerned about, in philosophy, getting things wrong about propositions, right? If you have a belief on a proposition and that proposition turns out to be the opposite of what your belief is, you fix it. Big deal. You learn. So all the atheists out there going, hey, there's no God, and people say, what if you're wrong? You just say, well, then I changed my mind. I fix it. Big freaking deal. It's not like it's the end of the world. Now they could argue, oh, well, there's spiritual condemnation and you're going to hell forever. That's a whole different argument, and I don't believe in hell, so it doesn't really matter. But that's a whole different argument, and that's more of an argument at Bacillum, because it's believe like me, or there's going to be ramifications, consequences for your non-belief, which I think is silly. But he is making the very astute observation, which I do agree with. It is very difficult to actually prove, and I mean prove logically, a negative existential claim. You can do it on some things. Square circles, you can prove that they don't exist, right? You can actually make a formal proof and say that this is the conclusion based upon the premises that square circles don't exist. They are a logical contradiction, therefore they cannot exist ontologically. Fine, I agree with that. But other things that are less contradictory, it's very difficult, maybe even impossible, to actually make a formal logical proof denying their existence or proving that the existence isn't the case. And that's fine. It's just philosophy, right? But that doesn't mean that you aren't warranted just to hold the belief. Or again, logical positivism went out in the 1930s. I mean, a long time ago. Nobody in their right mind that I've ever met, except for, again, just bizarre atheists out there that think they are trying to be smarter than anybody else, and they're not. But I've never met a philosopher, a modern contemporary philosopher that I've talked to, that holds to logical positivism. That means that you have to show by proof in order to justify a belief or knowledge. I think that's silly. Nobody can live their life like that. And of course, there's a lot of equivocation going on when it comes to these terms, when it comes to burden of proof, which is a legal term, onus probandi, which means completely different. Okay, so you have to be very careful when you're using these terms to signify to the person what you're going for. If I say you have a burden of proof, it doesn't mean you have to prove anything. It doesn't mean you have to prove anything according to law. It doesn't mean a preponderance of the evidence. It just means give me your reasons why you believe what you believe or don't believe. But he is right. It is very difficult to prove a negative existential claim. Doesn't mean you can't make it. So what?
And that required a lot of thought on my part to get over that hurdle of, this feels like I am unnecessarily shifting the burden of proof. If you think about it, we've talked about it with regard to court cases before. The prosecution has to demonstrate the truth of their assertions against the defendant. It would be a mistake for a defendant to come in and act as if they could prove their innocence when they may not be able to. And the reason...
Okay, but the problem with this is, again, philosophy isn't legalese, right? A court case is completely different. And the presumption of innocence in a court case is because we don't want to send a guilty man, an innocent man to jail, right? And so there's a reason why we hold to have what's called judicial infelicities or judicial errors and a higher ethical error, right? So there's really only four things that can happen in a court case, right? You can have an innocent man go to jail, which is bad. An innocent man go free, which is good. A guilty man go to jail, which is good. And a guilty man go free, which is bad. But we hold that the innocent man going to jail is a worse judicial error than the guilty man going free. So we have the presumption of innocence in a court case. There's no presumption like that when it comes to atheism. Flew was completely just off the wall when he wrote Presumption of Atheism. That's why I didn't get much traction, and that's why I wrote my paper against it. Because we have no such a necessity in that case. We're not talking about a judicial error. We're talking about beliefs, and beliefs can be based upon a lot of different things. And so there's no reason to have a belief that's just presumed when it comes to the ontological status of God. There's no reason for it one way or another.
That we put that burden of proof on the prosecution is, there's many reasons, one of which is that we're more concerned about convicting innocent people than we are that some guilty people might go free.
Correct.
And also, it may be the case that it's impossible, as a practical matter of reality, to demonstrate that you're innocent. If I was sitting home at home alone, and I don't have any recordings or evidence that I was home alone, that's all I can say is I was home alone when the crime occurred, then it just comes down to whether or not you believe that I was home alone. It doesn't in any way demonstrate. I can't provide evidence that I wasn't.
And that's true. And you don't have to actually prove, which in a court case is beyond a reasonable doubt or preponderance of the evidence, depending if it's civil or criminal. But that's not the same as logical proof, right? So when you say proof, we really got to determine what you're talking about. You're talking about evidential proof in a court of law. You're talking about logical proof, or you're talking about just general evidence, right? If I hand you something and I say, hey, look, I want you to evaluate this as proof that my claim is true, I'm not in a court of law. So
that I didn't arrange to create evidence of me being at home when there was a crime committed. And strategically, I've repeatedly pointed out to people that I feel that it's a great mistake to shift the burden of proof. We've dealt with this mostly when it comes to things like mythicism. There are some mythicists who are really irritated with me, and that's fine. I don't bear them any ill will, and I generally think that they are on the track to something that is not wholly unreasonable. But when you...
Okay, let me talk about that real quick. First of all, I don't know how Matt uses the term shifting of the burden of proof. I don't know how he's using it. The fallacy of the burden of shifting of proof is basically saying, I argue this, prove me wrong. That's a simple way of looking at it. Here, I say God exists, prove that he doesn't. That would be shifting of the burden of proof, right? Now, if I say, here's my argument, show me some errors in it, that's not shifting of the burden of proof. That's saying, hey, evaluate my argument, see what you find in error in it, see if you find any premises that are not the case, see if it's not the correct logical format, something along those lines. So that's not shifting of the burden of proof. But shifting of the burden of proof is when you shift upon the person you have a discussion with the onus of making their argument of the negation of your argument. So yes, shifting a burden of proof is a fallacy, because if I say something is the case and then I ask somebody, hey, well, prove me wrong, that is burden shifting. But atheist and theist, that's not burden shifting. A theist is not burden shifting to the atheist, and an atheist is not burden shifting to the theist. Each one of them have their own burden, right? There's no burden shift for a theist to say, yeah, God exists, and what's your position? God doesn't exist. Okay, they each have their own burden. Even if you say you don't believe in God, even if it's a non-belief, there's a burden to be had there. Why didn't you affirm or deny the proposition? Why are you a fence sitter? Why are you agnostic? These are burdens. So I do agree with him that the burden of proof lies generally on the person that's going to make the assertion in certain circumstances. But the mistake that I think that Matt and other people have made over the years is they assume incorrectly that only the person making a positive claim has a burden, that the person receiving that claim doesn't have any burdens, because they call it burden shifting. It's not. If I say this is the case and you don't affirm it or deny it or anything like that, you still have a burden as to why. That's not burden shifting. Burden shifting would be the person having to show that it's false, not justify their reasoning, right? If they're saying, look, your burden is to justify your reasoning why you didn't affirm or deny, or why you're fence sitting, or why you believe, whatever, that's an epistemic burden. Those exist. So that's not burden shifting. Burden shifting would be the theist saying God exists and then telling the atheist, prove God does not exist, which wouldn't be, wouldn't be a fair argument. That would be completely fallacious, and the atheist at that point would be correct to call the theist out on that. But if the theist says God doesn't exist, and they say, well, what's your position? And the atheist says, well, If the theist says God does exist, and they say, what's your position? And the atheist says, God doesn't exist. Well, then they have their own burdens. They have their evidential, they have their epistemic. But even if they say, look, I have no position on either way, I'm just a non-believer, they still have a burden, a proof. But that's an epistemic burden or a discursory burden, even, right? If they're having the conversation. Those are not burden shifting. The burden shifting would only be if at that point they're asking the atheist to demonstrate, prove, or show, or give argument why there's no God, when they're not required to, right? Because they're just listening to the person and saying, look, okay, you have this position, let's talk about your position. But if you want to have an actual dialogue with two people having different, opposite positions, then yeah, each one would incur their own burden of proof.
Claim as an assertion, Jesus never existed. He was just a mythical figure. You have now made a claim and you're adopting a burden of proof. We've had this conversation. I'll probably get David Fitzgerald back on again at some point to talk about it more because I love talking to him about it. Even though we disagree, we always kind of get somewhere and learn something in this. But at the end of the day, I would say that it was a mistake to assert that Jesus didn't exist unless you have, rock solid, concrete, strong evidence to prove it. It shouldn't just...
And I agree with him on that. I'm not a mythicist either. Matter of fact, I know very few people of any note of any philosophical standings that are mythicists. I know Carrier is obviously a big mythicist because he kind of formulated the whole mythicism based upon Bayesian analysis. And I've had my ups and downs with Carrier. I know he wrote 2 blogs on me and he got my positions wrong, but that's not uncommon. I hear with Carrier, he got Bart Ehrman's positions wrong too. And he gets into very, very strange minutia rather than just kind of talking about the actual argument. He goes down many, many rabbit holes. But I know that a lot of mythicists are just rabid about the claim that there is Jesus doesn't exist. And I think I agree with Matt on that. That's a really hefty claim from a historical point of view, not from a theological point of view, right? I mean, I get what they want to do. If they can show conclusively that Jesus didn't exist and all of Christianity is false. I mean, it's just false. It's just an entailment there. And I get that. But the problem is that there is historical evidence for Jesus. I trust the experts on that as well. And so to go down the mythicist line, I think is a mistake. And I think it probably excludes most people from most dialogues from people that are theologians or experts in the area of historicities, that they're not going to be able to talk to the person because the consensus is that Jesus did exist. And that's not, again, theologians. These are atheist philosophers as well that accept, if there was a person named Jesus. They, of course, deny his divinity, of course.
Sound like a conspiracy theory of this aligns with this, aligns with this. I didn't do this video to beat up on mythicists because I'm still largely in agreement with him on the principles, and we certainly are both in the position that we don't believe that Jesus was divine, and largely speaking, we don't believe that a God exists, or we may in fact believe that no gods exist, or we may in fact believe that God is just pretend, whether it's the result of sort of abductive reasoning to say that the best explanation for the various gods that have been proposed and believed by people is that human beings made them up. Now,
and I happen to agree with Matt on this. Sorry, Godless, but I happen to agree with Matt on this. You can make a justified abductive argument that the best explanation for what we observe is natural and that all posited explanations for natural phenomenon that have been attributed to some type of deity basically have been shown to be incorrect. I mean, from a scientific standpoint, obviously in philosophy, it gets into a whole different ballgame. There could be still Thor doing, thunder and lightning through naturalistic means or something like that. But at that point, who cares? I think it's just not really relevant to the big picture. But I do think that over the years, man has wanted to explain things, and by looking at natural phenomenon and going, oh, I don't have an explanation for this. We're going to posit some kind of supernatural causation. We're going to posit some kind of deity that does this. Why? Because we know humans can do certain things. We know that humans have these abilities to make loud noises. Well, God can make loud noises. He can make thunder. How do we make lightning though? Oh, well, we can't do that. There has to be some kind of supernatural causation. We're going to attribute that to an anthropomorphic being that's a lot like a human, but has these special powers, right? And that's another reason why a lot of atheists will argue that gods don't exist based upon the properties of gods being so similar to these human beings that we've read in comic books, that they sound far-fetched. They sound mythological. They sound as if they have the same properties what we'd expect to somebody who's just making stuff up, right? And that's a fair argument. I do think that's a fair argument. Now, you can't just say gods are all myth based upon that, but you can just say, look, it's more abductively the case that we don't go out and discover what the properties of Superman are, right? We never went out and figured out, hey, what does Superman has the properties? No, we were told what properties Superman has. He can fly, he can stop bullets, a superhuman strength. These are things that were told to us by man. Why? Because man made it up. And you can make the reasonable inductive argument that has the same thing that has happened through religion, that gods have just been made up. Now, the abductive argument, it would be the explanatory power of the God, right? So we had a lightning storm here last night. And before that, we had a kaboob. We had literally a kaboob. It was cool. Go look it up. It is a real thing, kaboob. If I was like 2,000 years ago, you just see this magical like lightning through the sky. Well, how does that happen? We didn't know anything about electrostatics. We didn't know anything about physics back. Well, sure, they knew about physics, but I mean, they didn't know what we know about physics, right? They didn't know how a cloud actually discharged, and they didn't understand electricity like we do now. So we have learned things. So we don't have to posit some kind of new supernatural causation. That's the whole point of methodological naturalism, is that you can only posit a natural explanation for a natural phenomenon. So I'm agreeing with him on this. I really do agree with him that maybe many of the gods came about because they wanted to explain something through abductive reasoning or inductive.
That's part of the reason that I wouldn't generally wear this shirt out in public. One of the other ones is that I, believe it or not, I don't run around seeking to offend people. I do a call-in show. I do several call-in shows, and I want people to call in. And I would love more than anything for them to be able to have good conversations. One of the problems is that most theists that are likely to call into a call-in show are not remotely prepared to have the conversations. They are not well versed in the relevant subjects, logic and reason, the nature of
See, I disagree with that. I've seen episodes and clips that people send me of well-versed theists that when Matt gets backed into a corner, he has an escape hatch. It's called the hang-up. And he does it often. I've seen people call in that I was like, yeah, this guy knows what he's talking about in logic. This guy knows what he's talking about in theology. Not that I know anything about theology. But he gets hung up on. They get berated. And I see that happen often. I mean, I remember one time somebody that I knew called in and telling Matt about the logical understandings of certain uses of terminology, such as disbelief, deny, reject. And you can go look in the papers and see how these words are used in what's called Frege rejectionism. And this is pretty ubiquitous. This is what it would mean if you read a paper and you said, you see something like to deny P, it means to assert the negation. If you see something like to reject P, it means to believe the negation. Again, they can use things differently, but I mean, these are just more common usages of the term. Disbelief is not to stare in astonishment, right? That's equivocation. If you say, I saw an accident and I stared in disbelief, sure, that's one of the uses of the term disbelief, but disbelief in logic has a very different connotation. Disbelief in logic means to believe false. So if you ever read a paper and it says disbelieve P, it means believe not P. That's what it means. I mean, I've never seen it used otherwise, anywhere, to any other purpose. And so, even though there's a little bit of ambiguity there about the use of the word disbelief, because it has different connotations, in a logical paper, it's always going to be, as far as I've seen, believes not P. Now, in a sociological paper, could it mean to stare in disbelief or just not accept something or refuse to believe something? Sure, of course. So, when somebody says somebody disbelieved this, it could mean exactly that. They just could not accept it. But we're not talking about sociology or philosophy, psychology. We're talking about logic. In logic, disbelief means to believe in negation. And so he just berated that guy. Like, you don't know what you're talking about, blah, blah. And the guy was completely right. So, yeah, Matt, when he goes against somebody who really knows more what they're talking about than he does, he does get belligerent. He does hang up. He's never evaluated my paper. I don't think he's even obviously read it. So.
Evidence. These are people who they sincerely believe, in part because either they were raised to or they had some experience that they couldn't explain, and God became an explanation for it. But when it comes to presenting reasoned arguments backed by evidence, they are ill-equipped. And in part, I would argue, I know some people are going to throw a fit about this, it's because even the greatest apologists out there are failing. They're not able to produce the evidence that they would like to be able to produce. And so the entire process of apologetics, which I'll probably talk about in another video, is setting people up to fail.
To a certain degree. I think that the high-end apologists have some very interesting approaches that you just can't poo-poo away. But those approaches require an extensive amount of education that the most of us don't have. I certainly don't. If you want to go check out a book called A Necessary Existence by Dr. Joshua Rasmussen, that book is really, really high end. It's dense. I've tried getting just partly through it, and I just can't do it. And matter of fact, he even told me, he's like, hey, after you read my book, I think it's going to convert you. You're going to be a believer, Steve. And I'm like, I can't even understand this, dude. I mean, no offense, but it's high level stuff. Very, very complicated modal logics. And I think it's a mistake just to kind of say, well, all of apologetics have failed, when there are some very, really interesting arguments that are out there using very complicated logics. But my counter to that is, if God requires you to have such a deep understanding of logic and philosophy in order to be saved, then you're no longer, in theology. You're in, some kind of weird philosophical thing where, God wants you to be a masters in logic. And that makes no sense to me. Most of the average person's never going to learn about logic to that degree, or even basic logic. And thousands of years, people weren't going around learning logic in order to be saved. So that makes no sense why it would have to require such advanced understandings of these topics in order to prove there's a God, or to even make an abductive argument that there's a God. And again, most of them don't prove there's a God. What they tend to prove using certain axioms is that there probably is a necessary being of some kind. And it doesn't mean assuming God. It just means something that has to be a necessity to exist. And a lot of atheists accept that, by the way. A lot of atheists accept that there has to be some kind of existence. It would make no sense to have absolutely nothing. But again, that gets us some really deep stuff, what it would mean to have absolutely nothing, or why there has to be something. Why does something have to exist? These are profound questions in philosophy. They're outside the purview of science, I think. I really do. I think they're outside the purview of science, because science doesn't address why there has to be something. It explains, but it doesn't address the fundamental concepts of why there must be something to begin with, or does there have to be something to begin with?
It is handing out arguments that a good chunk of people don't understand, rooted in claims and evidence that they don't have a grasp of and can't really demonstrate. And so what you get is these half-baked ideas, or this story where I remember part of it. And that turns into this game of telephone, to where you have people calling into the show to claim that scientists have conclusively demonstrated that the Earth is 6,000 to 12,000 years old, which is absolute nonsense,
false.
but they're only getting their information from Christian broadcasting things.
I'm going to try to speed this up.
In thinking on this particular shirt is really pretty straightforward. For every believer that's out there, I'm going to say every believer, even though I recognize there are exceptions, they generally think that the gods that they don't believe in are pretend. So when I wear a shirt that says God is just pretend, they are thinking the same thing for the other gods that's out there. They're the ones that are making an even stronger claim. I'm saying it's my considered opinion that for the gods that I've been presented with, and the ones that I haven't, I suspect that they're most likely pretend.
Okay, well, and there you go. And I give cred to him. I give cred. And he's right on that. I mean, sorry, Goddess Girl, he is right on this. Most Christians will have two schools of thought. There's what's called Hellenistic I guess schema, which God exists, but there are other gods, but he's the head god, right? So yes, there's a monotheistic type religion where they worship one God, but in henotheism, there's multiple gods out there, and Yahweh is just one of many, but he's the supreme God. So some Christians would say, yeah, there are other gods, but there's no other gods before the God Jehovah. And that's okay. And there's other ones that are saying, no, all the other gods are mythos. And I think that most Christians would probably say that the Greek or Roman gods are myth, or Aztec gods are myth. The Hindu gods are myth. I think most of them would say that. I don't know a lot of Christians that go around saying Zeus is real, right? Norse, they would, Norse mythology, they probably would, obviously, believe in Odin and things of that nature. They might say that Odin exists, and yeah, that Norse gods were just these other gods that, were in the Greek pantheon or the Roman pantheon, which you're talking about Jupiter and Saturn or whatever, Mars, or Ares. But they generally will hold that all other gods, other than the monotheistic God Yahweh, probably don't exist, or they would probably say they're just false gods. They don't exist. So him saying that God is not, God is pretend, is saying the same thing they would towards other gods. I agree with him on that. He's just saying that, look, these other gods are pretend, but so is yours. And in which case, he's actually, in that case, to me, implying global atheism. He's saying, look, all gods that have been presented to me and those that haven't are probably pretend. Okay, I don't have a problem with that. I mean, I think that's epistemically sound for him to do that, and I think it's justifiable for an atheist to do that. So I don't see any issue with what he said. I just don't. I think a lot of atheists are scared to make those kind of claims because they don't know how to argue against the theist. I don't think they know how to justify their own positions. Matt's been around a long time. He can justify his own positions. He's not incapable of making arguments to justify why he holds a position that God does not exist, which he does. I mean, I've said this for ages now. Again, going back to his other videos, he says many times, I hold the position there's no God. I have a positive belief there's no God. So for him to wear the shirt God is pretend, I think it is generally in the case global atheism. I don't think he's specifically talking about the Christian God. I think he's talking about all gods. But again, it doesn't make that significant amount of difference. I mean, it's to wear the shirt like that out is to actually invite, I think, conversation, right? You would have to expect some kind of pushback from people on that, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, doesn't matter. But there's nothing wrong with that, There's nothing wrong with that. If I wear, a Metallica shirt or a Black Sabbath shirt, which I no longer have, but if I have a Black Sabbath shirt, I had Ozzy shirts and Dio, but if let's say I had a Black Sabbath shirt, and I'm out there and they're like, oh man, that's satanic. Let's have a conversation about that. I'm cool with that, right? I expect, there might be somebody that would want to ask me about my shirt, right? Because I'm wearing something that is telling people what I like, right? I like Black Sabbath, or my ghost cross, right, which is an upside down cross. If I'm out somewhere and people say, I got asked the other day, what's that? And I'm like, it's a ghost thing, Ghost BC group. And I said, one of my favorite groups. We didn't get into the technicalities of the group, but it invites conversation. Nothing wrong with that. You wear something that has provocative or is going to elicit a response from somebody, that's fine. You have to expect that. You can't be some Karen that says, oh, I can wear whatever I want and not expect somebody, not to ask about it. Of course they're going to ask about it. That's what you're going for, but in a healthy way, right? You don't want to, if I wore a short shirt, for example, that was overtly racist or something, has some racial epithet on it, you really expect people not to say something about it? No, because we live in a culture where that's going to be called out, and it should be called out. You know what you're getting yourself in for. So if you wear that kind of shirt out there, sure, you have the right to do it. Don't get me wrong. I mean, freedom of speech, go for it. But also, that people are going to give you pushback on it. And if you get your ass beat out of it, so be it. But these shirts invite conversation. Again, I'm absolutely fine with that. Absolutely fine with that. I mean, I'm not going to wear a shirt of God is pretend because that's not my position. But I can certainly wear, a shirt that, like Black Sabbath or Ozzy or Ghost, or have some kind of satanic overtones or occult overtones, and be fine with that if people ask me about it. I don't care. I don't believe in Satan, but whatever, right? I mean, I like the motif.
I can't demonstrate it conclusively, but it seems to be a good reason. And what's more, the believers agree with me for all of the gods except for the one that they're saying is real.
Right.
And so they're making an even stronger claim. They're not saying God as a concept is pretend, which is probably what this shirt says, or that all gods are pretend. They're saying every god except for this one is pretend. And I would think that that the only way to rehabilitate it, where they could have some concern about this, is for them to try to claim that God on the shirt either applies to all gods, in which case I'm saying all gods are just pretend, and we can conclusively demonstrate this, rather than inferring it from the fact that we would all agree that most of them are pretend. And how do we tell the difference between the ones who are pretend and the ones who aren't? So I'm going to put them all in the same bucket until such time as somebody can distinguish the God that they believe in from the one that the rest of us believe in.
And look, I don't have a problem with that. I'm sorry, I just don't. Again, may not be my particular position, but for him to argue, look, I don't know a way to distinguish between a real God and a pretend God. If you can give me an experiment or something that, obviously science would be a problem, but if you give me a philosophical way to differentiate between a real God and an imaginary God, then let's apply it. And until such time we have that, my belief is that there is no such being as God. That's a really a very coherent, rational position for an atheist to take if they can justify it, which I know Matt can, but a lot of atheists out there don't bother to learn how to justify the positions. And this is why they're afraid to make those kind of epistemic commitment statements. And I think that's what leads them down the path of dishonesty. Because if you're an atheist and you really do think that there are no gods, and you're just going out there going, oh, I just merely lack a belief because ACA uses atheism as a non-belief, you're really doing a disservice not just to atheism but to philosophy and yourself, because the theist and the people having these discussions are going to think that you're being dishonest and intentionally trying to hide your actual positions. And we'll get into the ACA's position here in a second. So
it would probably be less offensive to them if my t-shirt said gods are just pretend, which would possibly be the all gods. But if it said gods are just pretend, that would be less troublesome, particularly to Christians and fundamentalist Christians.
I think he's right on that too.
Yeah. And the reason for that is, and I would put my Christian hat back on, but when fundamentalist Christians hear the word God, it means exactly one thing in their head. It is the God, the one true God, Yahweh, the everlasting creator of the universe who sent his son, blah, 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 blah. That's what God in the singular means. It's like a name of the one true God almost. And when they see gods,
I agree with
plural,
and in the classical schema, he's absolutely right on that. With a capital G, that generally is the Christian God. I use them synonymously, and I've even put this in my blog. When I say God, I'm just using it for any type of God. Capitalizer doesn't matter to me. That's just the schema that I work in. So when people say, hey, Steve, when you capitalize a G, meaning the Christian God, generally speaking, that's sure, but when I write it, I'm not, and I make that very clear, because God includes gods. It doesn't matter. But he's right, though. I think that if you had a shirt that said gods are imaginary, the Christian would be less offended to that, Bob, because they're thinking that he's referring to all the other lesser gods that either are subservient to the main God, which would be, like I said, more of a henotheistic position, or that they just don't exist, right? They're myth.
The knee-jerk reaction is to dismiss that as, oh, that's what the heathens or the pagans worship. That's what their beliefs are. And so if my shirt had said gods are just pretend, I think it would be less troublesome to believers. But it's technically more accurate to just stick with God in the colloquial sense and just acknowledge that all of these believers agree with me. There are a couple other reasons I'm happy to wear the shirt. I love three-quarter sleeve shirts, like the baseball type shirts, and this is one of them. It prompts conversations more than some of the other shirts that I wear. And I'm not always looking for a conversation. I like to go out and be left alone sometimes, but every now and then I don't mind someone coming up and saying, hey, what's that about? What's that mean? Are you talking about my God? And then I get to be like, it depends. What God are you advocating for? Because wouldn't you think this is true about the gods that you don't believe in? How do we distinguish between your God and
I think that's a good
that
point.
you claim is real and the ones that I look at and say are pretend? By the way, which God is yours? Even within Christianity, there's thousands of different denominations, and one could say that the characteristics they attribute to God are varied enough that there are probably hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands of different individual concepts of God, even within Christendom. I like to liken it to cryptozoology, which is the study of supposed creatures that are more probably fanciful and have never been demonstrated to exist. There are plenty of these proposed creatures, not just straight fantasy things like fairies and elves, but unicorns, the Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot, chupacabras, etc. I don't believe in any of them, including the ones that I haven't heard of. Now, somebody's like, how can you not believe in something you haven't heard of? And I'm like, how can you believe in something that you haven't heard of?
Well, and he's right on that, too. Look, if you haven't heard of something, then you can't believe in it. You can't have a belief of something that you're unaware of. You're innocent toward the proposition. You are in the non-belief. But this presents the problem. But this presents the problem to the non-belief atheist out there, the lacktheist, because now they're just making atheism synonymous with just not holding the God belief, which is a problem because now all innocents are atheist, which I think is, again, dishonest. To say that a baby is an atheist to me is dishonest. So, yeah, but as far as like the logical dichotomy, either you believe or you don't believe, he's absolutely right. I mean, you can't believe in something you don't have any information or any knowledge or information or awareness of, right? It's just not possible, because if you had awareness of it, then you have made the decision subconsciously or not to believe or not believe. But if something is just outside your epistemic purview, you can't believe in it because you don't know about it. You have no information about it. So yeah, he's right on that. That's about as far as I want to go on this. He gets into some other stuff, but it's just, I know we're running out of time because I know people are going to be all going over to watch the ACA about why, or his channel, why he left the ACA. I'm kind of curious myself. I'm putting on the background. I got to go to work tonight. But I'm going to put it on before I go to work. But I did want to point out this because he does say, well, does he say it in his, no, he says in the other video. He talks about the mission statement. He says, I'm leaving the ACA, but I'm still going to be doing the mission statement. I'm like, well, what is the mission statement of the ACA, right? And if you look really closely, the ACA, they say they're a nonprofit organization based in Austin, Texas. The ACA community of Austin is dedicated to promoting atheism. I think that's not true. Sorry, but I'm going to throw the BS flag on that. What they're promoting is non-theism. They're promoting non-belief. They don't go out and promote atheism. They don't go out and promote, hey, you should believe that there's no gods. That, to me, would be promoting atheism. Critical thinking, I have to throw the BS flag on that, too. The ACA is very cult-like. The members that I've ran into from the ACA, the AR, which is Atheist Republic, or AA, American Atheist, they do not engage in critical thinking. I'm sorry, most of them do not. It's just you guys have experienced it yourself. A lot of them rather just parrot what they find in a video from the ACA or the Atheist Experience, or just parrot what Matt says. Very few of them do any independent thought or any real reading or any reading of the literature or reading of the papers. They just, whatever Matt says, they kind of just parrot. It seems the antithesis to me of critical thinking. That's just my personal experience, and I know that most people that watch this channel had very similar experiences. Again, I don't know why he's leaving. I really don't. So maybe it has something to do with that. I don't know. Maybe he's had epiphany. Who knows? But we'll see. Secular humanism, that's true. They do promote that. And the separation of religion and government, which I think they do as well, but not that much, right? You don't see the atheist community of Austin really out there promoting the religion of separation of religion and government, secularism, as you would some other atheist groups like Atheist for Liberty, which I'm a member of, even though I'm not an atheist, but I do support Atheists for Liberty. The ACA serves the local Austin community through outreach programs, providing informational resources and various volunteer activities. In addition, the ACA serves the community at large through free online portals, including regular audio, video podcasts, and social media. We are not affiliated with a number of national and international groups devoted to atheism, free thought, or secular humanism. Oh, we are affiliated. I'm sorry. Okay, so the interesting part is here. They say, we define... Now, look at the first word there. We. The pronoun we. That's telling, because this is how they define it, but this is not how it's normally defined in philosophy, and they completely and utterly always seem to fail to recognize it. Sometimes they will if they're pushed to the wall, but this is only if you belong to the ACA, go with their usages. If you're a member of it, we, in our group, we hold this. If you want to be a part of this group, that's how we're going to be using it. You don't have to use it that way in other places, but when you see it here, that's how they're going to be using it. They're perfectly fine to do that. That's their group. In their group, they can do what the hell they want. They don't get to define it for everybody else. I'm not a member of the ACA. I don't have to use their usages, and I reject them outright. So they say we define atheism as a lack of belief in gods. Well, again, I think that's silly. We've all established that just makes no sense to do it that way. It would make as much sense as a theist saying we define theism as the non-belief of God's non-existence. And if you think one sounds silly and the other one doesn't, you're not a critical thinker, in my opinion. You're not thinking critically because you're having special pleading. There's no difference. There's no difference logically. As far as like the negation, right? Because if I say, well, let me rephrase that. There's no different logically of how it should sound to you, because obviously there's a difference logically. But if I say atheism is merely atheism is merely the non-belief of God's existence, that should be the exact same thing for the theist. And theism is the non-belief of God's non-existence. This is a negation. If one sounds correct to you and the other one doesn't, you may want to rethink how you look at these things, because that is a form of special pleading if you allow for one and not the other. Welcome to the WASP argument, the weak atheist special pleading argument. We see that people can be compassionate, giving, and live happy lives without God belief. And that's fine. I'm all good with that, but that's secular humanism, right? That's more humanism than it is atheism. They're not out there promoting Mackey or Oppie or Draper or more McCormick or all these other atheist philosophers. They're not out there promoting, hey, there are no gods. They're not out there doing that much, right? Other groups might be, like satanic groups might be, like Temple of Satan, they're out there, hey, look, gods are BS kind of stuff. They're promoting atheism. But I don't see the ACA really promoting atheism. What I see them promoting is non-belief, but they don't promote even secular humanism that much. We see that we can have a community with each other and work toward a common goal. Okay, that's fine. But again, that's secular humanism. Why don't they just call it atheist community of secular humanism? Because again, what do they promote that's atheism? I don't see it. I just don't. I mean, you can have atheism in your title, but at least be straight up about it. We're not promoting atheism. What we're promoting is non-belief and promoting secular humanism. I mean, even Atheists for Liberty, I have the same kind of objection about. But at least they're straight up and say, look, we care more about politics, and we care more about government having religious people making these weird statutes and things that blasphemy laws, and we're against prayer in schools and things of that nature. That's free thought. That's secular humanism. And so at least they're a lot more about that particular topic, because I don't know what the hell the ACA stands for any longer. All the ACA does is basically say, think like us or you're going to be ostracized. And they do viciously go after people. And I have no respect for the atheist community of Austin whatsoever. There are some people that used to be with the ACA that I like. But as far as the people that are working with the ACA, I don't think that any of them really, in my opinion, promote atheism, right? What they promote is ego. What they promote is call in and let us make fun of you and say how wrong you are, and we can hang up on you and make a show out of it. That's it. You know, again, maybe I'm overthinking it. But anyways, I'm going to wrap it up. I'm sure a lot of people want to go watch Matt explain why he left the ACA. I'll do a follow-up on that later, I'm sure. But for now, I got to get ready for work. So I want to thank you guys for joining. Thank you guys for listening. If you guys got some comments, please leave it in the video description. I know this is one of those rarities where I actually agree with Matt more than I disagree with him. So people can't say that I just crap on Matt for the sake of crapping on him. This video, I think he's absolutely correct for the most part on what he was saying. And I think that is telling that just before he gives the reasons why he leaves the ACA, he's telling people, yeah, God's pretend. There is no God, even though people are telling me Matt doesn't hold that position. Yes, he does. He's always held this position. You guys, the people out there that were not aware of this, you guys were just not paying attention because hashtag Steve was right. Good night.